Oh,
once
there we
I
go. I
start.
got it. It's good. We're good.
Oh, did you get it? Okay, good deal.
Yeah, it's reporting to the cloud.
Okay, good deal. Then, first of all, Ryan, do you remember that dependent tests, that handout for dependent tests?
Yes.
Could you push that out?
Oh yeah. As
Um,
soon as I get there, I'll push it out.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If not, I can do it. I just give me a
Yeah.
second. I've just got to
Actually,
remember
that's
how to
probably
do
a good thing. You go to chat,
it.
go to
Chat, that's what
more,
it was.
and share a file.
Okay. Give me a moment. Noemi?
Yes, you're fine.
Yeah, I'm still.
He's getting much better at it, Naomi. He's doing very good.
Thank you. That was kind of you.
See, he had to learn how to use the system, and he's really doing well at it. So.
Yeah, it's just a matter of me learning, like you said. So.
And there's a lot of commands you don't use them very often, so it's one of those like I can't remember how to do this one. You know?
Right. So what I'm sending out is, it's actually called, the number system that I have, it's going to seem weird to you guys. And by the way, Noemi, I know you're the only one on here, but because I know others will be listening to it, I'm going to kind of talk generically. So if you keep wondering why I keep talking as if I have a bunch of people on here, that's why. What I've got is, as I send out stuff to you, my numbering system as I send it off of my jump drive is to keep it straight, because I use this material in other teaching situations too. So that's why it's kind of weird. When once Ryan finishes setting up the material online, all of this is already going to be available online, and you're going to actually be able to access it before class. And it's numbered differently just from 1 to whatever it is. And it'll be easier to follow there. But for now, what I'm sending out is actually called dependent tests. It's just a PDF. Okay. So it will be in your chat room. So do you see that, Noemi?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and download that? And again, I want to stress the same thing I did on when we started on our first session. On your computer, you should put a file there just for downloads that I send to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, and the reason being is you want to be able to save these things, and it's easier if you do it now. However, you could always go and do it from the website once. I think Ryan said he was going to have the website up. Is it realistic to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
By the end of the day, it should be set up. What you'll be able to do is actually go on there and see handouts that are available. And even my PowerPoints, I've already sent him all my PowerPoints for all of part 1, and so they're all going to be available, and so you could look at them. However, I highly encourage you not to really work ahead, because it can be kind of confusing without the explanation. So anyway, and then on some of these, I'm going to encourage you to actually print them out. This is one of them. If I were you, it's only, I think, 3 pages. I would print this out if you can. Are you able to do that, Noemi, from where you're at?
Oh, actually, I don't have printer, but I will buy one later this
Okay.
afternoon.
Yeah, I would definitely get a printer. There's stuff that you're going to want to print out. And even as you go through this course, you're going to want to print out, forms and things like that too. So trust me, it would be a good investment for this.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get this slideshow started. Okay. So we're going to be talking about dependency. Now, we're dealing with Passkey Chapter 2, I believe it is. I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me right now to look at.
Yeah,
but
I believe it is.
I believe it's Chapter 2. But what we're talking about are, what does it take to put somebody as a dependent on your return? Now realize, looking back to the previous session, we were talking about generally what information do you need about a person. And then we said, hey, as you stick with us, you will learn why you need that information. You need it for one thing. One of the reasons you needed that information was to be able to determine who needs to file a tax return and who should file a tax return. Another reason you need the information is, which we talked about last week, is you need the information to determine what their filing status is going to be. Now, just as a quick recap, what are the 5 filing statuses that are available? Do you happen to remember those, Noemi?
Single, married, filing jointly, married, filing separately, head of household, qualifying widower.
That's it. Perfect. Good job. Yeah. So now today, we're going to talk about what does it take now that you've got all that figured out. Now, remember, some of what we said of the information you need to collect is about dependents. Well, why is that? Because you need to know if you can put somebody as a dependent on your return. Now, most of the time, dependents usually are going to mean a child. In most cases, in real life, that's what you're usually dealing with. But you're going to have lots and lots of situations where other people can qualify as a dependent. So how do you know which dependents qualify and which ones don't? What I've got here are a bunch of tests. Okay, now your reading teaches this differently, but this is how I'm going to teach it, and I'm kind of giving it to you all at once, but I want to kind of go through line by line through this, so don't get overwhelmed with this. So to determine dependent tests, these are to determine if someone qualifies to be a dependent on your return, qualifies as your dependent, okay? So as I say you in here, I'm talking about you as the taxpayer. So if you're doing your own return, it really is you. If you're doing a return for somebody else, we're talking about your client. So the first tests, there's actually 3 sets of tests. And what do I mean by a set of tests? It means there's some tests within it. So there's a set of tests that we call the general tests, okay? Don't worry about dogs jump creeks, all that right now. That's just a memory aid. Let's talk about what's there first. What are the general tests that a person must pass? Well, first of all, you must pass all 3 of these tests, A, B, and C. You must pass all of these in order to claim someone as your dependent on your return. You have to pass more than this, but these are the first 3. If you can't pass any of these 3, then that person cannot be a dependent on your return. So what's the first one? The first one is dependent taxpayer test. Now, what we're talking about here is you cannot qualify as a dependent of someone else. You cannot qualify as a dependent of someone else, okay? Now, this seems obvious, but this is one that confuses people. We're saying you, as the taxpayer, cannot be someone else's dependent, because how can a dependent have a dependent? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you're actually familiar with this, aren't you? You're actually experienced, aren't you, Noemi, with taxes? So I apologize for this because I am teaching actually for people that have never been introduced to this before. So bear with me a little bit. I know some of this is very simplistic for you. This is the only test that is about the taxpayer. All of the other tests are about the possible dependent. So this is the only one that has to do with, we're saying the taxpayer, your client, or you as the taxpayer. This is a test about you. Can you be somebody else's dependent? And then if you qualify as a dependent of somebody else, you fail this test, even if that other person does not claim you on their return. So if you can be the dependent of, say, for example, your parents, it won't matter. If you can be the dependent of someone else, then you cannot be claiming a dependent. So that's the dependent taxpayer test. Now, the joint return test, remember, all the other tests have to do with that person you're hoping to claim as your dependent. So joint return test, this is saying the possible dependent does not file a joint return. in most cases, somebody that's filing a joint return will not be trying to be a dependent of yours anyway. But there are exceptions to this rule. The exception is if the only reason your dependent filed a joint return was to get a refund of overpaid taxes. In other words, maybe your son, maybe you have a young son and daughter, and they're living with you. I said young son, daughter, young son and daughter-in-law. They're living with you, and let's say both of them only worked part-time because maybe they're going to college. Now they've earned some money, but they haven't earned that much, and you know that if you do their tax return, they're going to get back just the taxes they paid in. They're not going to get any credits or anything like that. No EIC or any other types of credits. If they go and file a joint return, all they're going to get back is the taxes that they paid in. If that's the only reason they file a joint return, then you can still claim that person as a dependent on your return potentially. But if they fail this test for any other reason than that exception, they cannot be your dependent. So that's a joint return test, meaning your possible dependent. Now, C is the citizen or residence test. Well, again, this is about your possible dependent. What this means is you must be a U.S. citizen or a resident of North America. What does that mean? Well, what countries are in North America, Noemi? It's all right. Just think of a map. What countries are in North America?
Sorry, I'm not familiar.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you. No, in North America, our neighbors, we only share North America with two other countries. One of them is Canada. And the other is Mexico.
Oh, okay.
So what this is saying is for your possible dependent to be claimed on your return, that dependent must be a U.S. citizen or must be a resident of either Canada, the United States, or Mexico. Why do I say North America? Because it's a little easier to remember that than saying, three more countries to remember. So just in other words, they must be U.S. citizen or resident of Canada, the U.S., or Mexico. Okay. Now, there is an exception for an adopted child. A child who is not, and we're talking about one who is not already a U.S. citizen that's being adopted or a resident of the U.S. So we're talking about an adopted child here who's not either a U.S. citizen or a resident already living in the U.S. So a child adopted by a U.S. citizen who will pass this test only if the child lives with the adopting parent all year. Okay. So another way to put this is, if you have a child that you adopted, or your client does or whatever, and you want to claim them on their return, they must either be a U.S. citizen or a resident of the U.S. And we know that because that's what this rule says. You must be U.S. citizen or resident of the U.S. or they had to have lived with you in some other country all year long. In other words, maybe you adopted a French citizen, but you guys all live together in France all year long. If that situation happens and you're a U.S. citizen, you can claim the adopted child as well. Okay? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's talk about how to remember this stuff. I use memory aids. Dogs jump creeks. And so what I want you to do, a way to remember, I want you guys to memorize these rules. These, even for the EA, when you get questions, for the EA test, when you get questions about dependency, either for the EA test or even in real life, you should be able to mentally quickly go through those tests in your head. And sometimes you need memory aids to remember that. So for the general tests, all you got to do is say, okay, I know there's some general tests. There are 3 general tests, and I need to think dog there. What do I need to think about it? Well, dogs jump creeks. Each letter, this is a acrostic, each letter represents something. So D for dogs, J for jump, C for creeks. So dogs jump creeks. Dogs, D, stands for dependent, see the D there? Dependent taxpayer test. The J in jump stands for joint return test. Creeks, the C in creek stands for citizen or residence test. Okay. Okay, so Noemi, let's do a practice. I don't know if this will work here. I am trying to find a way to. No, that didn't work. I was trying to find a way to black this out, Ryan. What's the trick to black this out for a minute?
What's that?
I want to white this out or black it out so you can't see the screen for a moment.
You can just stop sharing.
I'll try that. There we go. So what are the first of all, you have 3 general tests. What are the 3 general tests?
Dependent, joint return, citizenship,
Okay. The
or
dependent,
residency.
yeah, that's right. And dependent taxpayer test. It's important the word taxpayers in there because that's the only one that
I'm
has.
sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Kind of describe in your own words what the dependent taxpayer test is.
Dependent taxpayer test.
Yeah. What does that mean?
You should not be dependent on other taxpayer.
That's right. On another's return. Perfect. All right. What's the second test?
Joint return.
And what does that mean?
Your dependent will only file return to get refund.
That's right. That's right. And or not file a joint return at all. That the actual rule says the dependent is not filing a joint return. The one exception is if the only reason they're filing a return is to get a refund of taxes that were already paid in. Okay. And what's the third test?
Citizenship or residency.
Okay. And what does that say?
The taxpayer cannot claim a person as a dependent unless that person is a U.S. citizen or resident of Canada or Mexico.
Or the U.S. They can be a resident of the U.S.
Resident of U.S., Canada, or Mexico.
Right. Is any of those. That's exactly right. Very good. Very good. And what do you think? As a way to remember these tests, what do you think?
Think of a dog.
That's right. And what's the way to think about dogs? What is the memory aid there?
Dogs jump creeks.
Perfect. Gosh, you're good. All right. Good job. All right. I'm going to go back to sharing now. Okay. And here we go. It's coming back up. We're good. All right. Okay. So the last thing I want to point out about this is you must pass all 3 of the general tests. If you do fail any 3 of these general tests, then you do not get to claim that person as a dependent on your return. Now, once you pass all 3 general tests, that possible dependent must also pass either the qualifying child test or the qualifying relative test. So you don't have to pass both of these. You have to pass one test. These are sets of tests. Which we're going to look at in a minute. The qualifying child test is a series of tests, questions you got to answer and pass those. If you don't pass the qualifying child test, you have one more shot at getting this person to be your dependent because they might qualify under the qualifying relative tests, group of tests. Okay, so let's take a look at the qualifying child test. Now here, again, the memory aid. Hold on just a second, guys. I need to minimize that so it's out of my way. All right. All right, so the qualifying child test. Here you think cat. So before you thought dog, here you think cat. And you see R-A-R-S. Well, think of it this way. Rar, like a roaring lion. Rars. And why do I go through this? Because these are important tests to remember. So RARS, again, each letter stands for something. The first R in the RARS stands for relationship test. Now, what does that mean? That means this person must be related to you by definition in the way that the IRS allows. What is that definition? That is any variation of your child or sibling or descendant therefrom. Okay? So any variation of your child, sibling, or descendant therefrom. So would a stepchild qualify? No, Amy?
Yes, but
Yeah.
it's a variation.
Yes, that's right. It's a variation of your child. Would your natural biological child qualify?
Yes.
Of course. Would your adopted child, that's legally adopted child, qualify?
Yes.
Would I almost jumped ahead of myself here. I want to ask the next question. How about if you're taking care of a child that was placed by a legal agency? It's not your adopted child.
It is your foster child.
Foster child, yeah. But adopted children and foster children must be legally placed. It must be through a legal situation. Now, sibling. It can be a sibling. What is a sibling? What's another definition or example of a sibling?
Brothers, sisters.
That's exactly right. So your brother you can claim, your sisters you can claim, or descendant therefrom. What's a descendant from a child?
Grandchild.
That's right. What's a descendant from a sibling?
Niece, nephew.
That's right. So you can claim a niece, a nephew, a grandchild. So those are all variations of that. Now, this definition, the reason I present it this way is it's easier to remember than the definition, the way it's presented in your book and by the IRS. But it means the same thing. Again, if you memorize this definition, you'll get this part of the test right every time. Now, we were already talking about it for just a moment. An adopted child must be legally adopted. A foster child must be placed by a court or authorized agency. So an adopted child or a foster child cannot be just a child you brought into your home and said, I'm going to take care of them. It's got to be through some legal situation. Now, there's a special rule here that says relationships that are created by marriage survive the marriage. Let me say that again. Relationships that are created by a marriage survive the marriage. What does that mean? That means, for example, let's say you get married to someone and now you have that person's children are now your stepchildren. Legally, they're your stepchildren. You can claim them on your return as if they were your own children. But let's say you and that other person, their parent, divorce. You and their parent divorce. Well, guess what? Legally speaking, the IRS considers those children to still be your stepchildren, even if the two of you got divorced. So you could still potentially claim those stepchildren on your return. Okay? And obviously, they also survive your spouse passing away. So no matter what happens in marriage, once you get married and you have children on your return, those children can continue to be on your return even if the marriage ends for some reason. And that's the relationship test. Okay? All right. So, age test. So that RARS, first R stands for relationship test. Now the A in RARS is age test. What is the age test? Well, this says that your child or dependent must be under age 19. What does that mean? They must be 0 through 18 years old. So they must be under age 19. Or they must be a full-time student under age 24. Keywords here is under age 24 and a full-time student. Or they must be permanently and totally disabled. So, jumping down a little bit, what does it mean to be a full-time student? They must attend a qualifying school for at least 5 months during the tax year for full-time hours as defined by that school. So there's kind of 3 parts to it. They must be in a qualifying school. The easiest way to know if a school qualifies is if they qualify for Pell Grants to give to their students. then they are a qualifying school, okay? And so that's an easy way. There are some non-qualifying schools out there, and they usually are some types of trade schools. But I want you to know some trade schools, in fact, many trade schools are still qualifying schools. You've just got to check into it and get some information from the client in front of you to see whether or not they qualify. Don't ask the client if they qualify. They won't know. Ask them questions like, does your school get Pell Grants? Things like that. And if you need more help at that point, reach out for some help to one of the other tax pros. Somebody will know whether or not that school qualifies. Okay, so that's the first thing. Must be at a qualifying school. And they must attend for at least 5 months during the tax year. So 5 months covers 1 semester for those schools that work in semester, or it covers 2 terms for those that are, 3-month terms. So they must be at least 5 months during the tax year, and full-time hours is defined by that school. In Oregon, full-time hours are defined by almost all of the community colleges define 12 hours as full-time. In the community colleges, you get into the universities, the definition can change a little bit. So you just got to find out. So that's a full-time student. So coming back to the age test, the person must be under age 19. If they're not under age 19, they still might qualify under the age test if they are under age 24 and a full-time student. Or they still might qualify if they are permanently and totally disabled. Okay? Not temporary disability. So it's got to be permanent. And it's got to be totally disabled, which simply means they require assistance to take care of themselves. Okay? Also, it's possible in some cases when there's been like somebody marrying somebody significantly younger than themselves, it's possible the dependent might be younger than the let me rephrase it. Also, the possible dependent must be younger than the taxpayer or spouse unless permanently and totally disabled. There are situations where somebody marries somebody significantly younger, and it can result in a situation where you're trying to, like a spouse, it might be younger than let's pretend, for example, there's a man and a woman. Let's say the man is significantly older. He has kids that are older than the woman, say, that he married. In a situation like that, that woman being married cannot be claiming his child that's older than she is. So that's all it's saying. So following this phrasing is the best way to memorize this. The possible dependent must be younger than the taxpayer or the spouse. Notice it's one or the other. So whichever taxpayer or spouse is youngest, that dependent must be younger than that, or you can't claim them. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to, and this was a fairly new rule. It was only brought in about 5 or so years ago. I don't remember exactly. And the reason for that is they're trying to find out, they're trying to make sure that somebody's not cheating by claiming children that really aren't their children at all, because there's this marriage intact that kind of plays and manipulates the rules. That's all they're guarding against. Now, there is one exception, and that is if that person who might be older is permanently and totally disabled. So that's an exception to that. So under the qualifying child test, RARS, R-A-R-S, R, first R is relationship test. Second, and then the A is age test. What's the next R stand for? That's the residence test, residency test. This says that that dependent, possible dependent, must have lived with you for more than half the year. Now, the basic test is real simple. To claim a dependent on your return as a qualifying child, that person, that child, must have lived with you for more than half of the year. There are some exceptions, and most of them are pretty simple. Exception 1 is for temporary absences. For example, your child goes off to summer camp, or your child lives perhaps in a military school. That would be another exception, or in any kind of school where you have them living on campus. That would be an exception. And a second exception are for forced absences. That would be like kidnap children. So somebody who has a kidnapped child, a child who hasn't lived with them because they've been kidnapped, they can still claim that child on their return. Also, the children were born or died during the year. In the year the child was born or died, they are considered to have lived with you for more than half the year. Okay. The third exception is a little bit more involved, but we've touched on this, and we touched on it on the previous session where we talked about head of household and some other things. This is a special rule for divorced or separated parents. A non-custodial parent. Well, what's a custodial parent? That's the one who is granted the right to have the child in his or her home for the time. The non-custodial parent is the one who does not have the child most of the time. So the non-custodial parent may claim his child that did not live with him for more than half the year. There are situations where that can happen. He's allowed to, and I'm saying he, I realize it could be just as easily a lady as well, claiming her children, and she's the non-custodial parent. The non-custodial parent is, underneath this special rule, allowed to claim a child that did not live with them for more than half the year if all of these things are true. First of all, the child had to have lived with both parents more than half the year. What that means is the child lived with either mom or dad, let's say. Lived with mom or dad, and together that child living with mom and dad covers more than 6 months of the year. So I know of a situation from a few years ago where a child lived with mom for part of the year, dad for part of the year, and grandma for part of the year. Separate residences. But when I added mom and dad's together, that was about 8 months of the year. So they qualified under this. The child lived with both parents together for more than half the year. Okay, so to do that, the child have lived with both parents for more than half the year, and both parents provided more than half the child's support. Okay, so they had to have been providing more than half the child's support. And C, the parents did not live together during the last half of the year. Now, this should sound familiar. That part of the test is very similar, but not the same thing as head of household, where you can't have lived together in the last half of the year. And there's one other requirement. The non-custodial parent must get from the custodial parent a signed release of claim form, which is called a Form 8332. What that means in a situation like this, let's say mom has custody of Johnny and dad wants to claim Johnny that year. Well, he can do it if, first of all, if Johnny lived with mom and dad for more than half the year, and both mom and dad provided more than half of Johnny's support, and mom and dad did not live together at all during the year. And then finally, all that has to be done is mom has to give dad a release of claim form. And that's how you do it. That's how they qualify, in spite of the fact that they must have lived together more than half the year. So, RARs. First R is what? What's the first R in RARs?
Relationship.
That's right. A is?
Age test.
Okay. The next R is what?
Residency test.
Perfect. And then the S stands for support test. This is pretty simple. The potential dependent could not have provided more than half of his own support. I know that seems counterintuitive. What young children are supporting themselves? Normally they're not, but there are situations where they might have money that was set aside for them and it's being used for their own support. Or they might be old enough to actually be providing their own support, like maybe they're in college, you know. Normally you can claim a child in college if they're under 24 and a full-time student, right? But if they're providing more than half of their own support, they'd get disqualified because of this. So there are circumstances where a dependent can provide for their own support, but the dependent cannot provide for more than half of his own support if you want to claim them. Okay, so relationship, age, residency, and support. So let's go through this. So R in, well, actually, let me do this. I'm going to stop sharing again. We're going to go through this again, okay, Noemi? So, first of all, for the qualifying child tests, there are 4 of them. What do you think, cat or dog?
Cat.
And what is the acronym? What is the memory aid?
RARS.
That's right, RARS. Okay, so RARS, what's the first R stand for?
Relationship test.
And define relationship test. What does that mean? Define that for me.
Any variation of your child, sibling, and descendant.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, what does the A stand for in RARS?
Age test.
And what does that test say?
Your dependent must be under age 19.
Uh-huh.
Or full-time student under age 24.
Right.
And or permanently totally disabled.
Perfect. And what does the in RARS, the second R stand for?
Residency test.
And what does that mean?
Must live more than half of the year.
Lived with who?
With the taxpayer.
Okay, perfect. Good. There's some exceptions. There are 3 exceptions to that who must have lived with you more than half the year. Do you remember what those are?
The first is the temporary absence.
Right.
Second, forced absences.
Right.
And third, divorced or separated parents.
Perfect. Boy, you're a good student. I love it. All right, so I'm going to start sharing again here. Give me just a moment to get back. All right, and there we go. We're back. Very good. So keep in mind, now I'm going to back up here I'm just going to back up here so we can kind of review this now. Remember, there are 3 general there are 3 sets of tests. There is the general tests that we already talked about, and you have to pass all of these. Once you get through all of these and you're okay, you must pass either the qualifying child test or the qualifying relative test. And we just talked about the qualifying child test. That's where you think CAT, the RARS, relationship, age, residency, and support. Okay. Let's go on to the thinking about this now. If, let's say you go through that, but your potential dependent does not meet, it fails one of these tests. Well, this qualifying child test, okay, it was failed, but you still might be able to get that person as your dependent under the qualifying relative test. So what I'm saying is you don't stop there. If you fail one of the qualifying child tests, you just stop thinking about that one and you move on to the qualifying relative tests. So let's take a look at that. Well, take a look there, Noemi. What are you supposed to think there?
Dog again.
You're supposed to think dog again. That's right. So what's the memory aid here? It's quick response gets the shrew. Now, I happen to grow up on a farm. It was not uncommon for our dog to go out and chase little shrews. And a shrew is like kind of like a field mouse. They'd go out and chase them around. They have fun trying to get them. Okay. So if they were quick enough in responding when they saw or smelled a shrew, they might be able to actually catch one or get one. So quick response gets the shrew. So the Q in quick stands for qualifying child test. Mm-hmm. Well, that should sound familiar. Qualifying child tests, isn't that what we just did a moment ago? We did the qualifying child tests. What this is saying is that the possible dependent, the person you want to claim, cannot be the qualifying child of someone who is required to file a return or actually does file a return. For example, let's say you want to claim your nephew, but your sister, his mother, is actually filing a tax return and has every legal right to claim that child. In that situation, that person is actually filing a tax return and could claim your nephew. Therefore, you cannot claim your nephew. Okay, that's an example. So if this child, this person you want to put on your return, could be claimed by somebody else who has the right to claim them, or then you cannot claim them. It's that simple. Why? Because they're not going to let 2 people claim a child, and in some cases they only let the correct person claim the child with higher priority. Okay? Any questions about that one test? That one test right there kind of confuses people. But does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then, so the Q in quick stands for qualifying child test. Now the R in response stands for relationship test. Well, we had a relationship test under the qualifying child test, right? Now, don't read this here for a second, Noemi. Remind me again what under the qualifying child test, what the definition was that I wanted you to memorize. What did it say?
Any variation of your child, sibling, or descendant.
They're from. That's right.
They're from him.
Well, this is a building on that. It's the same definition with other people added in. So let's walk through this. It's still any variation of your child or sibling, and jumping forward to the second line, you'll see or descendant therefrom. It's part of that. So somebody who might be actually your child, but for some reason could not qualify under the qualifying child test, still might qualify under this. But there's additional people that might qualify. Who are they? Well, your parent. You can claim a parent on your tax return if they meet all the requirements. Or an in-law. Well, an in-law is pretty, oh, by the way, let me back up to parent. What does that include? Well, that includes your mom or your dad. That would include if you're married, your mother-in-law or father-in-law. Okay. That would include your grandparent. Now we talked about in-laws. Well, it kind of crosses over mother-in-law, father-in-law. Would a sister-in-law be included in this?
Yes.
Sure. A brother-in-law? Sure. Okay. Or a descendant from any of those. Okay. So any variation of your child or your sibling or parent, in-law, or descendant therefrom. And then there's a couple others that we tack on that could also be included. Or your aunt and uncle. So you might have an aunt or uncle that could possibly be your dependent. Or someone that has lived with you for the entire year. So why do you think, backing up to aunt and uncle, why do you think this is broken out from up here? Why didn't I just say in-law, any variation of your child, sibling, parent, in-law, aunt, uncle, or descendant therefrom? Why do you think that is? Critical thinking here for a minute. This is where you start learning tax laws and understanding what they're doing. Well, let me give you a hint. Because I don't want a descendant there from your aunt and uncle, because you can't claim a descendant from your aunt and uncle. What do you call a descendant? What do you call a descendant from your aunt or uncle?
They are not your immediate relative anymore.
Well, they sort of are and they sort of aren't. It depends on how you look at it. But what I mean is, if you have an aunt and they have, say, a son, what relationship is that to you? Your aunt's son is
nephew.
No, not a niece or nephew. That would be your brother or sister's son.
Yeah. Okay.
That's okay. Okay, no, it's okay. So your aunt or uncle, if you have an aunt, I have an aunt. I have lots of these. Okay, so I have an aunt and uncle. And my aunt and uncle have 2 boys and 2 girls. Those are my cousins. To me, those are my cousins. Okay.
Yeah.
So you cannot claim, what this is telling us is, guess what? You cannot claim you cannot claim a cousin. That's why an aunt and uncle descendant therefrom, I can't have it up there because I can't claim a cousin. Okay. So just the aunt or uncle, but not the descendant therefrom. You can't include a descendant from your aunt and uncle.
But if your cousins live with you entire year.
There you go. But that's different. You're exactly right. But and it can be a cousin or even somebody totally unrelated to you. They have to have lived with you for the entire year. And that means all year long in the tax year you're doing. So if you have a cousin, say, forget a cousin. If you have a friend that comes to live with you and meets all the other requirements, and we're talking about just the relationship test. If you have somebody come living with you that's not related to you in any fashion, except they lived with you, okay? And they lived with you, and let's say we're talking about doing a 2018 return. This person lived with you from July 1st to the end of the year. Are they going to meet the relationship test?
No.
No, because they have not lived with you for the entire year. What if they moved in with you on February 1st of 2018? Does that meet this test?
No.
No, it doesn't. What if they moved in with you in December of 2017 and moved out in December of 2018? Do they meet this test?
December 31st?
No. I was. Oh, you know that was you're spot on. Actually, no, Emily, you're spot on with that question. I was thinking like December 1st. If they moved out on December 1st of 2018, will they meet it?
No.
Okay.
It's not yet entire year.
Right. That's right. The point is they have to be there all the way from January 1 through December 31 of the tax year for you to be able to claim them. That's the point. And if they do, then this person will be treated as a member of your household for that particular tax year for the relationship test. Okay. So
Okay.
coming back to the memory aid, quick response gets the shrew. Q stands for qualifying child test. R stands for
relationship test.
And the definition there, and it's a good idea to memorize these, any variation of your child, sibling, in-law, parent, in-law, or descendant therefrom, or an aunt and uncle, or somebody that lived with you all year. Now, G in the word gets, that stands for gross income test. The possible dependent's gross taxable income must be less than $4,050. That was for tax year 2017. For the most part, I've updated this stuff for 2018, but I'm pretty sure this will be. I'm pretty sure this was 4,100 for 2018, and I apologize for having forgotten to update that. But the point is when you add all of the taxable income together for this possible dependent, it must be less than that amount. $4,050 if you're doing a 2017 return. I'm pretty sure it's 4,100 for 2018. I don't have my I don't have the book here in front of me to double check that for you.
Yeah, I have a question regarding that.
Yeah, sure.
Should we memorize both 2017 and 2018?
You know,
figures, yeah.
Yeah, you probably should in this case. It used to be, because you've been around a while. Let me ask you this. When did you, Noemi, start doing tax returns? What year did you start?
2017.
Okay, so you did 2017. So you know that they changed some rules. It used to be that this number was always the amount of the personal exemption. In 2018, they did away with personal exemptions.
Yes, so, but what I am concerned is, will the exam for this year for EA?
Yeah.
It will focus on 2018?
Yeah, I believe so. I think it's going to focus on 2018 by the time you do the exam. I believe it is. I believe it's focusing on 2018. Now, I'll be honest with you. I may be wrong about that. When I checked, it was 2018. Somebody says, no, they think it's still 2017. So there's some uncertainty, and we'll find out.
But because the materials you gave us,
yeah,
the drive,
yes,
it is for 2017.
Right, and we're aware of that, and that's because they didn't have the updated materials yet.
Okay.
But do keep in mind, though, for the most part, these tests are going to be not focusing as much on certain numbers like this. They're going to be focusing on the rules.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So what I would do just for this one, because of the change in the tax law, I would just remember if you're dealing with 2017 law, it's 4050 or 4100 for 2018. They are never going to put a question in there where they said, okay, what's the gross income test amount for 2018? And they give you both 4,050 and 4,100. They're never going to do that, because then they testing two different years at the same time. They're never going to do that. And I doubt they're going to ask a question like that. They're going to talk about, oh, does this person meet the qualifying relative tests? You know, something like that. They're going to ask more generic tests.
Generic. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so that's the that's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward. What's included in gross taxable income? Gross just means add it all together, but only add the ones that will be taxable income. And you don't necessarily know, and again, Noemi, I know you've been introduced to this, but I'm teaching this for those that it's brand new. So I got to say to the people listening to this that are not experienced, you don't really know what's going to be taxable, what's not. We're going to actually cover that here soon, but some income is taxable and some isn't. It's only the taxable income that you include for this test. Okay, so quick response gets, now what is the S, the SHREW, S and SHREW stand for? That's support test. Well, this could get confusing because we had a support test under the qualifying child set of tests. But this means something different. This support test says you must provide more than half of this person's support. So you as the taxpayer must provide more than half of the dependent support. Now, this is where I'm warning you. So there's, sorry about that, warning you, do not confuse this support test with a qualifying child support test. They're not the same. The difference is the source of support. Do you remember under qualifying child tests what the rule was for the support test? Do you remember how it was worded?
It says the dependent must not provide his own support.
Well, that's right. Must not provide more than half of his own support.
Half, yeah.
And I'm taking it back just so you can see it on the screen. This is the qualifying child test. We just backed up for a minute. The support test there says the potential dependent cannot provide more than half of his own support. So the focus is on the child providing his own support in this test. He can't provide more than half his own support. But when we go to the qualifying relative test, the support test is you as the taxpayer cannot provide more than half of this person's support. So it's just important not to get those two confused. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to do this again. We're talking about the qualifying relative tests. Okay? Enter the qualifying relative tests. What do you think? Dog or cat here?
Dog.
And what's the memory aid?
Quick response gets the SHREW.
That's right. Perfect. And what does the Q stand for in quick?
Qualifying child test.
And what does that mean?
Your dependent cannot be the qualifying someone on another's return.
That's right. Perfect. And in response, the R stands for which test?
Relationship test.
Which means what?
Any variation of your child, sibling, parent, in-laws, or descendant therefrom, or aunt, uncle, or someone who has lived with you the entire year.
Perfect. And the G for gets. What does that stand for?
Gross income test.
And that means?
Your gross income should not be more than 4,050 for 2017 or 4,100 for 2018.
That's basically right, but I just want to clarify something. It's not your gross taxable income.
Huh?
You said your income.
Yeah, gross income. Gross taxable income.
Yeah. No, right. That's not what I mean. I just want to clarify. It's the dependent's income, not your income. You said your income.
The dependent's income. Yeah.
There you go.
But that's
okay.
what I mean.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant. But, you know, other people are going to listen to this later, and we don't want to.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. So the dependent's gross taxable income must be less than a certain amount. And I'm not going to worry about the amount right now.
Okay.
And then the S in SHREW stands for?
Support test.
And what does that mean?
The taxpayer must provide more than half of the dependent support.
Perfect. So we got to look at the big picture here. So think back to all of the tests for dependency. There are 3 sets of tests. There are the general tests, the qualifying child test, and the qualifying relative tests. The general tests, you think what? To remember it. On the general
Dog.
test. That's right. On the qualifying child test, you think?
Cat.
And then on the qualifying relative test, you think?
Dog again.
Perfect. So on the general test, let's back up to that. You're thinking dog. What's the memory aid?
Dogs jump creeks.
Perfect. What are the 3 tests, 3 general tests that must be passed? And just name them for me.
The dependent taxpayer test.
Yep.
The joint return test. And
Yep.
the citizenship or resident test.
Perfect. And then if you pass all 3 of those, what's the next set of tests that you look at?
Qualifying child test.
And there you're thinking cat. What's the memory aid?
RARS.
That's right. That's right. So tell me, what are the 4 tests for the qualifying child tests?
Relationship test.
Uh-huh.
Age test.
Yep.
Residency test. Support test.
Perfect. And then if you qualify with a qualifying child, then you've got a dependent on your return. But if for some reason you don't pass one of those tests, what's the next set of tests that you go to?
Qualifying relative test.
Perfect. And you're thinking dog again there. What's the memory aid?
Quick response gets the through.
Okay, good. And what are the 4 qualifying relative tests?
Qualifying child test.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship test. Gross income test, and support test.
Perfect. Now, in real life, the reason I'm going through all of this so carefully is because in real life, you really want to be able to go through this. You really do want to be able to go through this that well, that you can, in your own mind, with clients sitting in front of you, you really do want to be able to actually go through that. And give me just a second here. While I'm talking to you, I'm going to get back going again. This is what you want to do, and I do this in real life. I'm sitting in front of somebody, and they say, well, can I claim Johnny, who's such and such situation? And I say, okay, well, give me just a moment. And in my mind, I'm going through quickly the 3 sets of tests. I'm going through the general tests. And if there's some information I forgot to get from the client at that moment, I will ask them on the spot. And I'm literally ticking them off in my head. That's what you want to be able to do in real life, because within 30 seconds, you should be able to go through all these tests with each individual, get the info you need, and then see if that child or person qualifies as a dependent. That's what you want to do in real life. For taking a test, you want to be able to have these things memorized, and that's why I am spending extra time on this anyway. Even my experienced preparers that have done this 3-4 years, I'm finding this helps them to come back and go through these basics, because it really does help in real life. Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about tiebreaker rules. What happens when more, as you can see already, there are situations when more than one person might be able to claim the same child. The 2 people, grandma and mom living in the same household with Johnny, they both could potentially qualify to claim Johnny on their return. So what happens if both of them put Johnny on their return? Well, the IRS is not going to allow that. Only one person can claim Johnny. The IRS will apply these rules, and these rules must be applied in this order. If you apply them out of order, you might get the wrong answer. So the first one is, so apply your rules in this order. The first one is the parent rule. The parent rule says if only one taxpayer is the parent gets to claim the dependent. So it's real simple. The parent rule. If only one taxpayer is the parent, only the parent gets to claim the dependent. All right. The second rule is longest lived rule. That means the parent with whom the dependent lived the longest. So let's say Johnny, let's come back to the parent rule, the first one, the parent rule. Let's say Johnny grandma and mom are both trying to claim Johnny. Who is the IRS going to give Johnny to on the tax return?
Mom.
Mom, because she's the only parent. But what if both people are the parents? That's where the longest lived rule. That just simply says the parent with whom the dependent lived the longest. So if Johnny lived with mom for 8 months and with dad for 4 months, who gets to claim Johnny?
Mom.
Now I'm saying if they can't agree, I do want to stress, mom and dad can agree who gets to claim Johnny in that situation because of a different set of rules. Remember those rules called special rules for divorced and separated parents? Mom and dad can agree who will claim Johnny, but if they can't agree, the IRS applies these rules.
Okay.
So just to clarify, by the way, even back here, sorry I'm jumping back again, but under the parent rule, if mom is not required to file a return and doesn't file a return and wants to give grandma the chance to claim Johnny, can she?
Yes.
Yeah, you bet. This again is only if mom and grandma cannot agree who will claim Johnny. The IRS will say only mom gets to. Longest live rule. If parents can't agree who will claim Johnny, then the parent with whom Johnny lived the longest. But let's say Johnny lived with mom and dad 6 months of the year equally. So exactly equally. Well, now what? Then we go into the third rule, which is the highest AGI rule. Now, AGI is something that we haven't actually taught yet. That's coming up later today. But AGI just stands for adjusted gross income. It just means your gross income minus certain adjustments that are made on it. So AGI, so whichever parent has the highest AGI gets to claim Johnny. So if mom and dad both of them lived with Johnny equally 6 months during the year, and mom has $30,000 of income and dad has $20,000 of income, who gets to claim Johnny?
The parent with the, again, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. The numbers, you're not seeing them. I get it. Let's say mom had $30,000 of income and dad had $20,000. Who gets to claim Johnny? Then in that case, mom is going to get to claim Johnny unless, again, mom and dad can agree. If they agree, the IRS doesn't care. But if they don't agree, the IRS is going to say in that example that mom gets to because mom had the highest amount of income. Okay. What about step 4? What if neither person claiming the dependent are the parents? What if neither of them are the parents and yet 2 of them are trying to claim them? Well, the person who gets to claim them is the person with the highest AGI, and that's called the non-parent rule. Okay. So an example might be is if there are 2, let's say there is a brother and sister, adult brother and sister trying to take care of Johnny, who is their nephew. And they can't agree who's going to claim Johnny in the return. The IRS is going to say either brother or sister, whichever one has the highest AGI. Now there's an exception. If either parent has a higher AGI, do not take. What are we talking about? Well, if neither person claiming the dependent is the parent, but the parent is filing a return and has a higher AGI than the people claiming Johnny, you're not allowed to. Why do you think the IRS would stop them from doing that? Just kind of think. I mean, what would you think about it? Why do you think they made that rule? Not sure?
No.
Okay. The reason is the IRS is trying to stop people from cheating. Imagine somebody trying to give Johnny away. I mean, not literally give him away, but give him away on a tax return just to get more money out of the government. If the parents are making higher AGI and are supporting this child or can be supporting this child, they're not going to let them let somebody else claim Johnny in the return just so they can get a higher, for example, income credit for it. That's why. They're just stopping people from kind of trying to work the system. That's all they're doing. So The order of the rules is the parent rule, the longest lived rule, the highest AGI rule, and then the non-parent rule. Parent rule, longest lived, highest AGI, non-parent. Okay? So you think you can remember those?
I hope so.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's try it. Let's try it. That's okay. Tiebreaker rules. First of all, the first thing to remember is if more than if more than one person can claim Johnny and they can agree on claiming Johnny, that's okay with the IRS if you meet the rules. But if you cannot agree and more than one person tries to claim Johnny, that's when the rules kick in. So what's the first rule? What's
parent rule.
The parent rule. What's the second rule?
Longest live rule.
What's the third rule?
Highest AGI rule.
And what's the fourth rule?
Non-parent rule.
Perfect. Now going back to the parent rule. The first rule is the parent rule. What does that say?
If there's only one parent claiming.
Then the parent gets
the parent
to claim.
can, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect. The second rule is the longest lived rule. What does that one say?
The parent with whom the dependent live the longest.
Perfect. And that's who gets to claim. The third rule is?
Highest AGI rule.
Perfect. And what does that one say?
The parent with the highest AGI
gets to claim the child. Perfect. And then the fourth rule is?
The non-parent rule.
Which says?
The person with the highest AGI.
Perfect.
Can claim the dependent. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Good job. Okay. Now, let's go through some quizzes. Ryan, are you still with us right now? I'm pretty sure you're around here.
Yep, sorry, just had me on mute.
No, that's okay. Did you happen to get these questions in yet or not? I kind of doubt it because it was late Friday when I got them to you.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Okay, no problem. So we're going to, I erroneously have the answers marked there for you. So this is going to be kind of a giveaway, but I meant to have them fly in, but I made a mistake here. So you're going to get the answer on each one, but let's talk about it anyway. Walt and Julie are married U.S. citizens. So they're married U.S. citizens, and their son Guy was born while they lived in France. Which of the following is true? Guy cannot be Walt or Julie's dependent. Guy fails the citizen or residence test. Guy must move to the U.S. before he passes the citizen or residence test, or Guy meets the citizen residence test. Obviously, because you can see the answer, Guy meets the citizen or residence test. Okay. So what I want to do here is, this is going to be kind of silly if I do it this way. So I want you to give me just a moment. I'm going to fix these. Okay. It's better for learning if I can fix these right now. Okay. Can you give me a moment to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I apologize. This is going to be a little bit tricky if we don't do it. It's probably going to take about 3 minutes to do this, is what I'm guessing here. I had all these questions set up for you and forgot to make them so you couldn't see the answers at first, and that's what I'm fixing right now. Okay. I just got to save this so I can bring it back up. It'll just take a moment. I'm almost done now. Okay. Let's try this here. Thank you for your patience with this. Sorry about my error, but we're back on board here. And I'm about to get it started again here. There we go. Okay. So there was the first question, and we said guy meets the citizen or residence test. Okay. All right. So now Paulette supported her daughter, Andrea, who's 18 years old, and they lived together all year while Andrea's husband, Carl, was in the armed forces. So Carl is required to file a tax return, so Andrea and Carl filed jointly. Had they filed separately, Carl would have been required to file, but Andrea would not. Okay, so there's a bunch of information in there. So let's talk about this. Which of the following statements is true? The joint return test is not met for Andrea or Carl. Okay. The joint return test is met for Andrea only, or the joint return test is met for Carl only, or the joint return test is met for Andrea and Carl. What do you think? Now, I want to help you a little bit with this. This is testing that general test, the joint return test. Remember the general dependency test? Dogs jump creeks. The J in that is the joint return test. That's what it's testing. So go ahead and read that. I'm going to stop talking for a minute, read that, and then tell me what you think the answer is.
The joint return test is met for Andrea only. B. Oh.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. This is a little tricky. The reason is because here's the key here is Carl, by the way, I didn't create these questions. These are coming out of one of our books, not one of our basic tax prep books. Carl is required to file a tax return. Okay. And they actually do file jointly. The fact that he would, if he had filed this whole sentence about filing separately, Carl, that's what it's thrown in there.
Had they filed separately?
Yeah, but they didn't. They're actually telling you they were filing jointly, so that's disqualifying them. And there's nothing in there about, oh, that he's only getting a refund. That's the only reason they're filing. It doesn't say that. So it's not. And if it never says an exception or anything about the information for the exception, assume the exception does not apply. Because the exception would have been if the only reason that they were filing was to get a refund, then it wouldn't apply. So that's all. It's because they are filing a joint return. It's not a matter of what they could have done. It's a matter of what they are doing. That's the point. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, sorry. I know that was kind of a trick, but... All right, so here's another one. Yvette is 22, is single, and not a dependent of anyone else. Her niece, Angelina, 18, came to live with her on February 1st of the tax year. Angelina is not married. Yvette provided more than half of Angelina's support, and no one else lived with them. Which of the following is true? And I'll let you read through those for yourself, and you tell me which one you think is true.
A. Angelina is Yvette's qualifying child.
That's exactly right. And that's because, and I'm doing this more for helping those that'll watch this later. Remember, you go through the general dependence tests first. Dogs jump creeks, dependent taxpayer test, joint return test, citizen or residence test. Everything in here, we're assuming there's nothing in here to get us to think that they don't meet the 3 general tests. So they do. What they're testing now are the qualifying child tests. That's where you think cats, RARs, relationship. Well, that's her niece. That she qualifies under relationship. Age, she's under age 19. That qualifies. Residency, lived with you more than half of the year, which she did. She's lived there since February 1st of the tax year. And support. The support test for a qualifying child says that the child did not provide more than half of their own support. Well, we know that she didn't because Yvette, the 22-year-old, provided more than half. So that's the reason she's a qualifying child. Okay, let's look at another one. Dana and her son Tommy, 4 years old, live with Dana's boyfriend, Asa, for the entire year. Their relationship does not violate local law. Asa is not Tommy's father, but he provided more than half the support for Dana and Tommy. Dana's only income is wages of $2,813, and she's not a qualifying child of anyone. Dana is not required to and does not file a tax return. Which of the following is correct?
Asa can claim both Dana and Tommy as dependents. B?
Yep, that's exactly right. And again, are they qualifying as qualifying child or qualifying relative?
Qualifying relative.
That's right. So again, for those that are listening later, you would go through the qualifying relative tests. That's exactly right. Okay, let's do another one here. Lenny is 19. He's not a student and has been doing yard work since he was age 16 to earn money to buy a car. This year, he made over $5,000 maintaining yards in the neighborhood. Lenny lives with his father, Bruce, and Bruce provides more than half of Lenny's support. Bruce can claim Lenny as which of the following?
Neither a qualifying child nor a qualifying relative.
That's right. And again, just help people reason through this. We're assuming that they already met all the 3 general tests. So now the first thing is we go into determining whether or not Lenny can be his father's qualifying child. The relationship, qualifying child test, relationship is there. It's his son. Age, is he under age 19?
No.
No, he's not. Is he a full-time student under 24?
No.
No. So he fails right there. That's the reason he cannot be a qualifying child, but he still might be a qualifying relative. So let's go to the qualifying relative tests. Think dog.
Cat. Dog again, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. No, I was just thinking my way through this. Quick response gets the shrew. Q, qualifying child test. Can Lenny be the qualifying child on somebody else's return? No. So far, so good. Response, R, relationship test. Does he meet the relationship test? Sure.
Yes.
It's his son. Gets, gross income test. It must be under, for 2017, under $4,050, or for 2018, under $4,100. Is his gross income under $4,100?
No.
No. That's why he fails. So he's not a qualifying relative either. That's the reason he's neither a qualifying child nor qualifying relative. All right, here's another one. Zach provides more than half the support for both of his parents who live in their own apartment. His parents have gross income of $8,000 in non-taxable Social Security benefits, and they're not required to file a tax return. Zach wants to claim both his parents as dependents. Which of the following is true?
Zach can claim both of his parents.
That's exactly right. Again, this is looking at the qualifying relative test. Again, the test is quick response gets the shrew. Q, can either of the parents be qualifying child on another return? The answer is no. Relationship test. They meet the relationship test because part of the definition is any variation of your parent. So they meet that. Gross income test. Is their gross income less than, is their gross taxable income less than $4,050 for 2017 or $4,100 for 2018? Is it? The answer is yes, because remember, it's gross taxable income. I've already given this piece to you. It's Social Security, their Social Security benefits are not taxable, so this doesn't count. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't count this because the Social Security benefits are not taxable. Okay, so we don't count that, and that's the reason. And then, of course, you provide more than half of their support. That's the support test for this, and it already said that he does provide more than half their support. That's why it works. Okay, so Bert and Ernestine are married and filing separate returns. Their daughter, Dora, is 10 years old, is a qualifying child for both parents. They lived together they all lived together from January 1st until December 15th of the tax year when Ernestine moved out into a separate home with Dora. Bert's AGI is $59,156 and Ernestine's is $42,784. Bert and Ernestine each file a return claiming Dora as their qualified child. Using the taxpayer rules, who is allowed to claim Dora as a qualifying child? Remember the 4 rules in the order that you have to apply them.
Only Bert.
I'm double checking something before I give you the answer.
Yeah.
No, you were fine. I'm actually making sure I've got this right.
And Ernestine each.
Well, okay, so let's do this. What are the 4 tiebreaker rules in the order? What's the first?
Parent rule.
The parent rule. In this case, both of them are the parents, so that's not going to help us. What's the second rule?
Longest live rule.
Okay, and who did Dora live with the longest?
They all live together.
Until? Until?
Ernestine moved into a separate home.
With Dora.
With Dora. Okay. Yeah.
So what's the answer?
Ernestine.
There you go.
Yeah, Ernestine.
See how important it is to take these rules and keep them directly, one after the other in the right order. Okay? Good.
Right.
Okay.
Must be in order. Okay.
That's right. So we're going to do another tiebreaker one. Okay? So Lulu, 17, is a qualifying child for both her parents, Dean and Viveka, I guess is how we pronounce that. Dean and Viveka are not married, but they and Lulu live together the entire year. Dean's AGI is $55,741 and Viveka's is $37,803. Dean and Viveka both claim Lulu on their tax returns. Who gets to claim Lulu under the tiebreaker rules?
Dean.
You're right. It's only Dean. And again, tiebreaker rules. First rule is the parent rule. Well, they're both the parents, so we got to go to the next rule, the next test. Next test is the longest live rule. Well, we've already said it said that they live together in the entire year, so that doesn't help us. What's the next rule? What's
highest AGI rule.
Highest AGI rule. And who had the highest AGI?
Dean.
Dean. Exactly right. And while we're at it, what's the fourth rule?
Non-parent rule.
The non-parent rule. Okay. So another tiebreaker rule. Pat is 28 and single and has a son, Dave, who's 4. Pat and Dave live with Pat's mother, Sue, who provided more than half the support for both Pat and Dave. Pat's AGI is $15,722 and Sue's is $52,118 under tiebreaker rules, which is allowed.
Pat is allowed to claim Dave as a qualifying.
That's right. And which of the 4 tiebreaker rules makes
parent
that possible?
Rule.
That's exactly right. Only Pat is the parent. Hey, if Pat agreed to give Dora, I'm sorry, Pat's mother is Sue, sorry. If Pat agreed to give Sue the right to claim the child, could he have?
Huh? Pat?
If Pat agreed to let his mom claim Dave, could he have done that? Could they have agreed who would have claimed Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, you bet they could have, but they didn't. That's why these rules are in place. Okay. So guess what? We got through that. Those are the dependence test. That's why we went through those. So look, let me ask you something, since this is, since you've been with us for a couple of years now, Emmy. First of all, the way I present that, is that a little easier to keep all the pieces straight? I want to know some feedback. Does that help you?
Yes.
Yeah. Does it help you to kind of memorize those little things and have them easily available in your mind when you're taking tests and helping clients?
Yes.
Sure, sure. Okay. So I'll tell you what, it's 11:30 right now. What do you say we take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to take a look at the Form 1040. How does that sound?
Yes.
Okay. That sounds good then, Noemi. Ryan, is there a way to just pause this so we're not eating up a bunch of memory for a 5-minute break?
Yeah, there is.
Okay, great. I'm going to let you do that, and that way we're not feel like you're ready.
Yeah, okay, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so we've talked about, over the last 2 days so far, collecting information and how to use that information to determine things like if you need to file and what filing status you're going to use. And today we talked about using some of that information to determine if somebody can be claimed as a dependent on your return. Now we're going to start focusing a little bit more on the 1040. The Form 1040 is actually the actual form that's used to report a tax return. That is the tax return. What I want to do is start by giving you just kind of an overview, a snapshot of how a 1040 calculations work. Sometimes a form can be confusing, especially since, just to clarify, especially since they changed the look of the form this year. In 2017 and years prior, all the years I've done tax returns and what Ryan's done them, we've had one look for a Form 1040 with only minor changes in it. Suddenly this year, they decided to change the look of the Form 1040, and it got a little more confusing. But sometimes if you set the form aside, that can be confusing, and just look at what is the form doing, it starts making more sense. And that's what I want to do here, is I just want to talk about one line at a time, walk you through this so that you can see what each piece of the 1040 is doing. So this is just a snapshot of how the 1040 calculations. So first of all, on the Form 1040, you start with income, okay? You start with income. And then there's a thing called adjustments. Now, we haven't actually discussed adjustments, but basically an adjustment is something that you get to subtract out of your income. And you want to subtract stuff out of your income if you can, because you get taxed on what's left over. You get taxed on your income, and the more we can subtract out of that income, the less tax you're going to pay. So those are called adjustments. So income minus adjustments gives you adjusted gross income, AGI. Remember, we touched on that earlier today. You know, I said we didn't know what AGI was. Well, there it is. AGI is nothing more than the taxable income that you put on your return minus adjustments you were able to make out of it, and thus you get adjusted gross income. Then you get to subtract from the AGI deductions. And there is two kinds of deductions, actually three kinds. It's called standard or itemized. I'm not going to discuss those right now other than to say they exist. But you have a standard deduction amount or itemized deduction, and you have a new thing this year called a QBI, qualified business income deduction. So you take your AGI minus those deductions, and that gives you taxable income. What does taxable income mean? It means your income minus the adjustments and minus the deductions. That's taxable income because that's the income they're going to base the tax on. So once you have your taxable income, you go to a tax table, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit messed up here. This tax liability, this taxable income, it was supposed to be up here where taxable income, you look it up in a formula and it gives you your tax liability. Tax liability means the amount of tax, federal income tax that you're responsible to pay for the year, okay? So, for example, you might have $10,000 of taxable income. We go to a table to look up how much tax you're supposed to pay. So maybe the amount of tax you're responsible for is $1,000. Now, you might have already paid that out of your paychecks, but still that's your tax liability. That's the amount you're responsible for the year. Okay? Now, then you start with your tax liability and you subtract out what are called non-refundable credits. A credit is something that either helps you pay a tax or helps you get a refund, okay? So a credit is something the IRS gives you credit for. What are some non-refundable credits? We're going to talk about those later and when we get into the credit section. But a non-refundable credit specifically can only reduce tax liability to zero. In other words, if you have a non-refundable credit and you owe, say, $500 in tax liability, it can only decrease your tax liability down to $0. It can only take that $500 and reduce it down to zero. It can't help you get a refund. Then you have tax payments made. That was supposed to be made, not mad. The tax payments made during the year that can result in a refund. Okay, so these are tax payments that were like taken out, you know, where you had federal income taxes withheld each paycheck. That's what we're talking about. Tax payments that you made during the year. And those, if you paid more than you owe in the tax liability, that can result in a refund. You can also have refundable credits. These are, again, credits, but this type of credit can result in a refund. It can decrease the amount of tax you owe, and if you have no more tax that you owe, then what's left over can give you a refund. So, you end up with an amount due. So you get your tax liability minus non-refundable credits, minus tax payments that you made during the year, minus refundable credits. That gives you either a refund or an amount due. So if we were running these numbers, you would start with your income, you subtract out adjustments to get your AGI, you'd subtract out deductions, standard or itemized deductions, and the QBI to get your taxable income. We'd use that to look up your tax liability. Your tax liability minus any non-refundable credits, minus tax payments made during the year, minus refundable credits gives you an amount here, and that's either going to be a positive or negative amount. If the amount is positive when you're doing it this way, not on the real form, but when you're doing it this way, if the amount is positive, you have an amount due. That means you still owe some money. That means all of these credits and everything was not enough to pay off this tax liability. But if the amount is negative, you have a refund of that amount. That means the negative amount means your tax liability minus all of these things, you actually paid more than you, or you're getting credit for more than you owe. And so you're going to get a refund of that amount. Now, one thing, when you're using this, I want to stress, this is not the actual form. If you were to use the actual form, it would not work the calculation would work differently. It's not going to end up with a positive amount, meaning an amount due. It doesn't work that way. This is a down dirty, quick way to figure out if somebody has a refund coming. Okay? And when you're doing this, don't forget, when you're doing the non-refundable credits line, make sure you're only reducing it, the tax liability, to zero. In other words, make sure this first subtraction is not any more than the amount here. So if there's $500 for tax liability, you cannot do refundable credits for more than $500. Otherwise, you'll end up with the wrong answer. Okay. Now, each of these lines, I'm not going to go through them, but each of these lines correspond to a line on the Form 1040. And the Form 1040, you have like income, you report that on page 2 and on Schedule 1 of Form 1040. Adjustments are the same thing on page 2 and Schedule 1. The deductions are reported on page 2 of 1040, and so on. Okay, I'm not going to go through that because that's something you should work with on your own when you put a Form 1040 right in front of you. Okay, so before I go any further, I just want to give you a chance, Noemi, is this kind of making sense what I'm doing here? You're familiar with this generally. You've just never seen it presented this way. Do these calculations, the way I summarized it, make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So I wish some other people were on here so I could check with them, but anyone listening to this, if this is confusing to you, I want you to get it. I want you to be able to do a basic tax return from scratch without even touching the Form 1040, because if you can understand this right here, this is going to help you do a tax return both in real life and to pass that test. You've got to understand how Form 1040 goes together. And looking at it this way will help because these are the basic calculations on it. Okay, let's go to the next screen. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can get this up and running here. There we go. This makes it a little bit bigger. I realized I had it in another format. Okay. All right. So let's do some examples here. And we're going to want to actually run numbers here. So let's do this, okay? So Joe has income of $20,000 and no adjustments. His deduction is $12,000. His tax liability is $803. His employer withheld $1,000 of federal income tax from his paychecks during the year. So I want us to answer these three questions. What is Joe's AGI? What is Joe's taxable income? And does Joe have a refund or an amount due? And how much? So I'm going to give you a moment, Noemi. Would you run your numbers and then let me know when you're ready to discuss them? Okay?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So what do you have for Joe's AGI?
$20,000.
That's correct. Joe's taxable income?
$8,000.
That's correct. And the refund or amount due?
Refund. $197.
Yep, that's exactly right. And again, for those that are not that are watching this after the fact, all we're doing is taking that snapshot of the 1040 calculations and plugging in the numbers. That's all we're doing. So he started out with income minus adjustments. So 20,000 minus 0 gives you AGI of 20,000. So AGI minus deduction. 20,000 minus 12,000 gives you 8,000 of taxable income. That's how we got it. And then refund or amount due is simply your tax liability minus non-refundable credits minus amounts paid minus refundable credits. So $803 minus amount already paid in, $1,000, leaves you with a refund of $197. Okay, let's do another one. Mary has $30,000 of income. She has $6,000 of adjustments. Her deduction is $18,000. Her tax liability is $603. And her employer withheld $12,000 from her paychecks. Same three questions. So let me know when you're ready on that one, Noemi.
AGI is 24,000. Taxable income is 6,000. Refund is 597.
And that's exactly what I put up there. Again, we just started going through the formula. We just took the $30,000 income minus adjustments. 30,000 minus 6,000 leaves us with AGI of 24,000. AGI minus deduction, which is 24,000 minus 18,000 leaves us with taxable income of $6,000. Her tax liability is 603 minus the amount withheld, 1,200, leaves us with a refund of 597. That's exactly right. Okay, let's do another one. Julia has $16,000 income and no adjustments. She has a deduction of $18,000. Her tax liability is 0. Her employer withheld $18 from her paychecks.
AGI 16,000.
Yep.
Taxable income 0.
Yep.
Refund 800.
Now the reason, that's exactly right. And the reason she was able to do this so easily is because, again, income minus adjustments gives you AGI. 16,000 minus 0 gives you 16,000. Then AGI minus deduction gives you taxable income. Well, 16,000 minus 18,000 means there's nothing left. You've already wiped out all of your income. So that means the taxable income, 16,000 minus 18,000, you stop at 0 whenever you're subtracting taxable income, because you can't have negative taxable income. So 16,000 minus 18,000, that would be negative. So it's 0 taxable income. That means everything that she had withheld, she's going to get back, all $800. Okay, let's do another one. Frank has $50,000 of income, no adjustments. His deduction amount is $12,000. His tax liability is $4,373. He made estimated tax payments to the IRS, and just to clarify, because we haven't yet talked about estimated tax payments, those are where he himself paid during the year some payments to the IRS because he felt like he might not have paid enough. So he made estimated tax payments to the IRS during the year of totaling $4,000. Estimated tax payments are treated just like money taken out of your paychecks and given to the IRS. And let me know when you're ready, Noemi.
Yeah, AGI $50,000. Taxable income 38,000. He owed 373.
That's exactly right. So again, walking how she got this, everyone. Income minus adjustments, 50,000 minus 0 gives us AGI of 50,000. AGI, excuse me, AGI of 50,000 minus the deduction of 12,000 leaves us with taxable income of 38,000. I've already given you the tax liability of $43.73. He paid $4,000 of that during the year. So $4,373 minus $4,000 means he still owes, he has a tax liability. He only paid $4,000 of it, so he still owes the $373. That's exactly right. And guess what? That is it for the snapshot. That's just a quick, down dirty way of calculating a Form 1040 calculations. It's a down dirty way of finding out if somebody would owe or not owe. In real life, you might actually want to do this. This isn't 100%. This is 100% accurate as far as it goes. The thing is a bunch of pieces, more detailed pieces that can affect it. This is a quick way to find out, though, if somebody is going to get a refund or not. And then you'd want to do the full 1040 to make sure you got all the pieces in there. Okay, so what we're going to do now that we've looked at the overview, oops, my apology. I stopped my sharing by accident and I didn't mean to. Now, what we've done is we've looked at a quick snapshot of the calculations that are on 1040. Let's look at a 1040. Now, I had to choose whether or not to teach you guys the 1040 as it existed in 2017 and earlier, or as it exists in 2018. Because I'm not sure, absolutely positive, which test is, which year is going to be tested on, I chose to focus on the 2018. So let's walk through this, okay? Waiting for it to come up. There we go. So first of all, we're looking at, this is an overview of the Form 1040, and we're looking at page 1 of the 1040. This section on page 1 is what we call the label. It has information about you as the taxpayer and your spouse if you have a spouse on the return. It has information about your filing status. It has information about your dependents. That's all going to be right there, okay? That's called the label. Then you also have what's called a signature block. This is where you as a taxpayer have to sign, and then your spouse signs. And then if you're using a paid preparer, or you are the paid preparer, this is where the paid preparer signs, is right there on that line. So it's called the signature block. And don't so much, by the way, memorize each of these pieces. You got to just get to know where things are at on the form. So that's page 1 on the Form 1040 is very generic. It's the label section and then the signature block. Now let's look at page 2. This is where all the information starts coming in to do the return. First of all, the first section, lines 1 through 6 there, are your income section. It covers specific items like wages, interest, dividends, things we haven't talked about yet, but we will very soon. Social Security benefits. So there's all of those on there, but there's also an attachment that's called a Schedule 1 income, and we're going to look at that in a moment too. But the Schedule 1 income means all of the other income items, the IRS taxes that are not showing in these first few lines. The rest of it is put onto this schedule and then just comes through right on line 6. It gets added in with line 6. So it comes from, you put everything else on Schedule 1, and then you carry that over here to this schedule right there on that line. Oh, excuse me, this page on that line. Okay. The next section is called adjusted gross income. Remember, from our calculations, that's income minus adjustments. Now, I put Schedule 1 adjustments because that's where you get them. It's not actually here. You have to go to Schedule 1, the bottom half of Schedule 1, and again, we'll look at that in a minute. But the bottom half of Schedule 1 has the adjustments. You add all the adjustments together, and you take line 6 minus those adjustments, gives you the amount on line 7. All right. Now remember, income minus adjustments minus deductions. So now we're talking about deductions on these two lines, lines 8 and 9. These have the standard deduction or itemized deductions. Have we talked about those yet? No. Just know those are deductions that you get to subtract out. Then you also have on line 9, the QBI, or qualified business income deduction. We haven't talked about that either, and we won't for a while, so don't worry about that. Just know that that's where deductions will go on the form. Now, the next lines 10 and 11, cover taxable income and then tax. Line 10 is taxable income. Remember, on our calculations, how do we get to taxable income? You start with income minus adjustments, gives you AGI, or adjusted gross income. AGI minus deductions gives you taxable income. That's how you get here. And then you look up in a chart and find out what the tax is, and you put it right there on that line. Okay? Now, lines 12 and 13, this covers non-refundable credits. You don't know what non-refundable credits are except for one thing. Can a non-refundable credit result in a refund? No, Emmy?
No.
No, it can't. It can only decrease your tax liability, or the tax that you're responsible for. It can only decrease it to 0, and then it stops right there. So non-refundable credits, what you actually do is you put the one, they've divided this up. This is some of the changes they made this year, but they divided this up. You have one non-refundable credit in line 12, and the rest of them you have to calculate on Schedule 3. And then you just carry it through from Schedule 3 to this line right there. That's what you do, okay? So your non-refundable credits, you use Schedule 3 to calculate most of them, and then you carry it through to this line. So those are non-refundable credits. Then you have the refundable credits. Noemi, can refundable credits result in a refund?
Yes.
Yes, it can. Now, when I highlighted this, I included the federal income tax withheld. So I just want you to know I put it in there just so it's all together. But again, in our calculations, remember, we have the tax liability minus non-refundable credits, which was there, minus taxes withheld and paid during the year, minus refundable credits. So that's what we're talking about. That's where those would get put. And the ones that are not listed directly on this form will be on Schedule 5, and then it gets all added together on Schedule 5 and carried to this line right there. Okay? And then you finally do the final calculation, and it results in a refund or an amount due. And this is where I wanted to stress that the calculations that we showed you a moment ago, they won't ever come out negative here. There always be an amount, but that doesn't, it depends on which line that you have to report it on, because one line is for refund and the other line is for an amount due. That's how you know. The calculations, the way I presented it a moment ago on the other set of slides, was just to help you figure out a quick way to calculate it without even needing the form. This is the actual form though. So again, I'm just going to back up through this so you can see all the pieces on this one. So again, it's income, including income that you're carrying from Schedule 1, and then you calculate all of the adjustments that you're doing, and you do your income minus adjustments and carry it to page 1 of the form, page 2 of the Form 1040 right there. Then you subtract out your deductions that you have, and that gives you your taxable income, and use that to determine the amount of tax from the tax tables. Then you start figuring out how much non-refundable credits you have, and you have to use Schedule 3 for some of them. And then how much refundable credits that you have, and you have to use Schedule 5 for some of them, and that will result in a refund or an amount due. Now that's page 2. Now we're going to look at these schedules we were talking about. Schedule 1 is used to help you calculate your income and your adjustments, okay? So this is additional income, and this amount needs to be added to the income on Form 1040, page 2, line 6. In other words, this line right there, okay, which I'm using with the mouse. Okay, so that's all that's happening is most of the income items are going to be put here. It's going to be totaled, and then this total is going to be carried over to this page, this line right here. Okay? Now, the bottom half is similar, but it's only for adjustments. All of the adjustments are put right here if there are any adjustments. And these need to be subtracted from the total income on the Form 1040, page 2, line 7. So what are we talking about? Oops, wrong direction. We're talking about here. This line right here. So any amount from the adjustments get all added together and then carried forward to page 2 of the Form 1040. So just before I go any further, does it make sense? Is it making sense to you, Noemi? Does this seem clear to you, and do you think it would be clear to others what we're doing with this Schedule 1?
Yes.
Okay. And if there's any clarification you ever want to add to this because you've been through the change, you know the old way and the new way of doing this. If there's anything that can help clarify any of this, feel free to jump in and just share that with the group, okay?
Yes.
Okay. So that's Schedule 1. Now let's look at Schedule 3. Notice I skipped over Schedule 2. I just want you to know Schedule 2 is really short like this one is, and it just adds a few extra special taxes that get added in. We're not going to deal with that right now. It's not important for your understanding how the Form 1040 goes together. I just want to focus on the ones that matter right now to us. Schedule 3 covers non-refundable credits. These get all listed on here and then added together and then carried over to page 2 of the Form 1040. Just like we showed you when we were on page 2 of the Form 1040. These are the non-refundable credits. Now let's jump to Schedule 5. These are the refundable credits. These are the ones that can result in a refund. You list the proper amounts right there from the calculations for each of the rules. We haven't done any of these yet, so don't worry about what they are. But then they get carried forward. Once they get all totaled here, they get carried forward to, again, page 2, in this case, line 17 on the Form 1040. So everything, all these little schedules keep being carried back to the main form, that's the Form 1040, and added up and there. Okay, so are there any questions about the overview of this new Form 1040? First of all, Noemi, having seen a change from 2017 form to 2018 form, do you have any questions or want any clarification on the new form that you can think of?
So far, none.
Okay.
None.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Now, another question. Do you have any advice or pieces of understanding from having actually used the new form that might help people understand this new form?
None so far.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm asking because you're on the front lines of this, and any insight that you've got would be great. Okay, so we've covered now the form. We've covered the overview of the Form 1040. We've taken a look at how it calculates together, and then we've looked at the actual 1040. Now, it is a little after 12 right now. We have a couple of options. We could go ahead and stop here and take a lunch break if you want to. Noemi, this is completely up to you. We could take a lunch break, or we could jump on into the next section, and then the next section is filing basics. It's basically, we're going to cover different stuff about how to file a tax return and what's involved with it. What would you prefer to do? Do you want a lunch break now, or do you want to push on through?
Push on.
Push on. Okay. All
How
right.
about you?
Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. I thought maybe I heard Ryan talking there. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so give me a moment. I think there's a couple of things I want to push out to you, so you've got them. I just got to get to the right place here. Pushing all the wrong buttons here. Hold on a minute. Chat. All right, come on. There we go. There's a couple items I'm going to push out to you right now, okay? So give me just a moment to do that. So the two things that I'm pushing out, one of them is a 2018 W-2 form, and the other one are the tax tables for 2018. And not that you really normally would need this. When you guys go to test, if they really wanted you to look something up, they're going to provide it. They're not likely to have you look up something like this, but I need to teach this to you so that you can actually know how to look it up so it makes sense. Because if you don't understand it, they could ask questions about the process and you wouldn't understand it. So what I'm saying is I'm actually going to teach you how to look stuff up in a tax table, for example, as part of this. And you're going to actually do some of it. But you're not likely going to have to do that on a test. But if you don't know how to do it and they ask questions about it, then you wouldn't know. So Noemi, did you get both of those?
Yes.
Okay, could you take a moment to download both of those onto your computer and let me know when you're done?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
How about the overview of you will not share it with me? The last two topics.
Oh, do you want, I'll try to, yeah, I'll push those out if I can. Do you want those too?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
already downloaded these two files.
Okay, well, see, you're so fast. You're ahead of me. So, all right. No, I'd be glad to do that. Hold on just a minute, getting there so I can. As long as they're not too big, I don't mind doing it at all. All right, so, oops. You're seeing how I have everything organized.
The overview of the...
Yeah, I'm going to see if it, yeah, that one went through okay. Now, these are PowerPoints. These are PowerPoints, so you got to be able to open it in PowerPoint because that's all I have for you.
Okay.
And these will also be posted on that website that Ryan's work getting put up. Okay, but there you go. They're right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So just let me know when you're done with that. Okay, perfect. So I would suggest, oh yeah, you don't have the ability to print out, so that's okay. The reason I wanted you to print out the really the W-2 is so you could look at the boxes because they're hard to see on the PowerPoints. I
have in my book.
Oh, do you? Perfect, perfect. And for everyone else that's listening to this, get that printed out. You don't necessarily have to print out the, in fact, I wouldn't print out the tax tables because they're too long. You could just look at it on your computer when we get to that. But this one-page W-2 I would print out so that you have a copy of it and you can look at it while we're talking. Okay. So let me boot up a PowerPoint here that we're going to look at. And I'll make it bigger here after it finishes loading. Okay, so we're going to go over some basic filing basics. And what we're going to cover is some miscellaneous stuff about filing. Okay, so let's just jump into it. First of all, income. This is another way to kind of just start introducing you to the income section and how, remember we went through all of the steps and what goes into a tax return, you know, income minus adjustments. We're going to go through a little bit more detail here with these with a few simple examples. That's what this section is about, to kind of flesh that out a little bit more, give you a little more detail. So that's what we're doing. So we're going to look at the income for a second. So starting in 2018, which was this past tax year that we just finished the tax season for, U.S. citizens or residents who file U.S. income tax returns all file using only Form 1040. For tax years 2017 and earlier, we had something called a 1040EZ, a 1040A, and just a regular 1040. These were just shorter versions of the 1040. They did away with the 1040EZ and the 1040A for tax year 2018 and later. Do realize if you're ever in real life working on 2017, you're still going to have a 1040EZ and a 1040A. Now, this is a W-2. The whole idea of the W-2 is this is how your wages from working get reported to the IRS and to the state, okay? And each box represents something specific. Box 1, and this is why partly I wanted you guys to have a printout so you could see it better, because these are kind of hard to see. But box 1 of a W-2 is always for wages, tips, and just compensation generally you get from an employer. And then box 2 corresponds with box 1. That's the federal income tax that's withheld on those wages. So remember all those calculations we were doing where we figured out what your income was, and then we went to a chart to figure out what your taxes are. They're withholding, trying to get you to the right amount of taxes withheld that they estimate you're going to actually owe based on your income. That's what this is about. So box 1, the amount of box 2 is based on the amounts in box 1. Okay? So an example of that. This example shows in box 1 wages of $13,700.47. Now, when you go to report that, you report it right there in box 1. And I didn't actually put the number in there, but you report it in box 1. When you report it, you always round it to the nearest whole dollar. So in this case, $13,700.47 rounds to $13,700. Anything 50 cents or more rounds $1 up. Okay? So box 1 always goes to 1040 line 1 where it says wages, salaries, tips, etc. from a W-2. That's where you put it on the W-2. If you have several W-2s, you add all of these this box from each of the W-2s together and then put the total on that line. Now, box 2, remember I said was for taxes. That amount is what was withheld for federal income tax. Well, you get credit for that, as we showed when we did this. Where do you report that? You report that right down there on line 16 of the Form 1040. You just carry that amount down, and again, if you have several W-2s, you add the amounts from box 2 of each W-2, and then you carry the total to line 16 of the Form 1040. And that way, when you're running that calculation, you're getting credit for what you already paid. So let's do a little knowledge check. Karani received 2 W-2s. She has $275 of unemployment compensation. She had $58 total adjustments to income. So we want you to answer the following questions. And we may have to jump back and forth to do this because you kind of need these W-2s that you can't see when we're asking the questions. But let's start out with some basics we know that they're going to want to know. One of them is, what is going to be the total wages that are reported on line 1 of the Form 1040? What are the total wages? Let me know when you've got the answer there, Noemi.
58,370.
Yep. 71. I think you rounded something. That's okay.
Yeah. 71.
Yeah, you rounded one of those. You rounded wrong. Oh, you just rounded this one. You didn't round this one up. That was the only difference.
Yeah.
If you made that $25,215 plus $33,156, you would get that answer right there. That's the only difference. So the next question is we want to know the total income on line 6. Now, line 6 is simply the income minus adjustments. So how much adjustment was there? What's the total adjustments to the income?
58.
That's right. So $58. So if this is your income, What's your adjustments to income?
But you have unemployment.
My apology. I think I jumped to the
Sorry.
wrong line because I don't have the Form 1040 in front of me. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. I made a mistake. So we have this amount on line 1. What amount is on line 6 of the Form 1040? What is line 6 of the Form 1040?
Line 6.
Yeah, what's line 6? What's the what information are we supposed to enter on line 6? I'm pulling out my Form 1040 so I don't
Total
make another mistake.
income.
Total income. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I made a mistake. I was thinking the next line. So
Yeah.
line 6, what should we be adding to that amount to get to add into line 6? What should we be adding to the 58,371?
275 unemployment compensation.
That's right. And that's going to give us how much?
58,646.
That's right. Exactly. So what she did is she simply took, and I'm backing it up. I keep backing up so you can see everything. She simply added this plus this to get the answer for the first one. Then she took that amount and she added in the unemployment compensation. And that's her total income. Okay? So her total income is that amount. Now, total income minus adjustments gives you what?
58,588.
That's right. And that's the one I was thinking of. Line 7, the amount on line, or the line 7 of the 1040 says adjusted gross income. That's where you, remember on Schedule 1, you calculate any adjustments, and then you subtract it from the amount on line 6. And that's how she got the answer. Okay? All right, so here's another one. Welton and Chrissa Taylor are married. Their filing status is MFJ, married filing jointly. Here's their W-2s. So let me see what the questions are. Okay. So line 16, their question is, what amount is entered on Taylor's 1040, line 16? What is on line 16? What are they asking for?
Federal income tax withheld.
Federal income tax withheld. So what boxes do we need to, what box do we need to look at on each of these to get that answer?
2.
Box 2. So here's box 2 for the first one, and here's box 2 for the second one. So what do we do to get the answer?
Add.
Yep, we add those two together. So go ahead and add those together and tell me what you get.
7,028.
7,028. Perfect. Good job. Okay, so that's just a quick look at actually doing part of the tax return, the Form 1040. So now let's say your client or you end up with a refund. Well, what are your options for this? Well, if a taxpayer has paid more income tax than they actually owe, in other words, maybe they had $1,000 withheld from their paychecks during the year, but they really ended up only owing $800. They're going to have a refund of $200. They're entitled to a refund. Now, here's some options. They can just have the IRS cut a check to them and mail it to them. Or they have other options to receive their refund. Well, what are some of the other options? Well, one option is they can actually take that refund and just apply it against next year's taxes. In other words, they can say, IRS, just keep it and give us a credit for next year's tax return because and why would they want to do that? Well, maybe they expect they're going to make more money next year and might need that. So it just means a little more money that's already waiting there that they get credit for next year to help them pay next year's taxes. So they can apply it to next year's taxes. Or they can directly deposit that refund into their bank account. So rather than having the IRS send a check to them, they can just have that money, the IRS directly deposit that money into a bank account or into an IRA. Have we talked about IRAs yet? No. But just to let you know, it's called an individual retirement arrangement. In other words, it's a retirement account. So you could have your refund put directly into a retirement account or into a health savings account or a brokerage account. you can pretty much have that refund put into anything as long as you've got the deposit information. Okay, so direct deposit can be used for paper and e-filed returns. So we haven't really talked about this, but when you go to file a return, you can have it printed out and sign it and attach copies of the W-2s and mail it to the IRS, or you can electronically file it. Okay, and that just means it's sent kind of through the internet through some special software. You can use direct deposit regardless of how you file it. And if the taxpayer is due a refund, they can have it directly deposited in the bank account instead of receiving a paper check. And if they're going to do that, you got to make sure that the person's name is on the bank account. So any accounts listed for a direct deposit must be owned by the taxpayer, or if it's a joint return, at least one of the spouse's names have to be on that account. And the reason is you can't be depositing funds from one person's account into somebody else's account. Now, obviously, to do that, that means the taxpayer has to be willing to provide the routing number and account number for that deposit to be done. And the routing number on a check is usually the first set of numbers on a check. If they have an actual physical check there, it's usually the first numbers, and routing numbers are always 9 digits long. So they're always 9 digits long. So here's an example of one. This is your routing number right there. And you'll notice that's exactly 9 digits long, and all routing numbers are 9 digits long. Usually on checks, these numbers will be in between straight up and down lines or colons. There's 2 dots with 1 dot above the other. That's where you'll find it. The second set of numbers that are in between is your account number or the account number. The account numbers can be different lengths. It depends on the individual bank or institution, but that's what those are, okay? The last set of numbers, by the way, is just the check number. You don't ever want to include the check number on that. So that's what has to be put in there. Now, what would happen if you put in the wrong number? Well, if no such account, if a such account exists, you could potentially have a real problem. If it's not caught, that money could get deposited into the wrong account. But that rarely happens, but it can happen. That's why in real life, when you're doing this, you want to be very careful to make sure that you enter these numbers right. Double, triple check them yourself, and then have the client double and triple check it, okay? And but what happens if it's not an account that exists? What'll happen is the bank will reject it, saying, sorry, no such bank account exists, and the IRS will simply turn it into a paper check and mail it to them. So they'll still get their money even if it doesn't exist, but you want to be very careful, because if that, I have seen it happen where the money gets deposited into somebody else's account. Okay? Okay, now what about depositing to other accounts? Another option for the taxpayer for refund, besides having all or part of the refund deposited into like a savings account or checking account, is depositing it into something like we briefly mentioned a moment ago, into an IRA, which is, or any of those others, traditional, Roth, SEP, or Simple. Those are all different kinds of retirement accounts. Don't worry about remembering all of that, but you can have it deposited into a retirement account or into a health savings account or an educational savings account, okay? Or you can actually have it, use it to buy treasury bonds, you know, their investments, you know, treasury bills and bonds and notes. You can use it for that way too. Now, before choosing this option, the taxpayer needs to check with their financial institution to make sure it accepts such deposits. Look, in real life, today's world, you don't really have to worry about that too much. Pretty much all of these accept it, unless you get into things like the health savings account. There you may want to check. But if you're dealing with a bank or a regular financial institution, they will accept it. That's all I got to say about that. Now, what happens if his deposit is denied? If any of the following apply, the IRS will actually reject the taxpayer's request for direct deposit, and then they'll just send a paper check instead. First of all, if any of the numbers that you put on there, don't worry about the lines, are crossed out or whited out on a paper return. So if you're putting direct deposit information on there and then you white it out because you made a mistake and write the correct direct deposit, the IRS is going to be concerned that somebody got a hold of that return and is trying to steal your refund. They're not going to do it. They're not going to directly deposit it. They're going to send you a paper check. If the taxpayer is filing a joint return with their spouse and the financial institution does not allow a joint refund to be deposited to an individual account. In other words, husband and wife, the account's only in the wife's name, but the tax refund is in both names. Sometimes some institutions will not allow that. They want both names on the account before they'll deposit a joint refund. So if that happens and it gets rejected, the IRS is going to convert it into a paper check. The taxpayer files their 2018 return after December 31st, 2019. What this really means is you have a chance to timely file a tax return. Now, we haven't covered this, but I think we need to touch on it right now. You normally file a tax return by April 15th of the year after the tax year ends. So 2018, the tax year 2018 ended on December 31st, 2018. We had till April 15th, 2019 to get these filed. If you got an extension, you have till October 15th of 2019 to get it done. Basically, if you don't get it done by December 31st of 2019, you can still get your refund, but you cannot do direct deposit. In other words, anything that's overdue and without permission, and all of them by this point are overdue and without permission, are going to have to be a paper check. And that's only to protect from people fraudulently claiming returns that don't belong to them. 3 direct deposits of tax refunds have already been made to the taxpayer's account. So some people work in several states. And so along comes, let's say somebody works in 4 different states and has a federal refund and refunds from 4 different states. There's 5 potential deposits into the same account. Once they hit number 4, the bank is going to start rejecting that deposit. And that means it's going to get converted into a paper check and mailed to them. Or if the name on the account does not match the name on the tax return, if that was to happen, then again, the IRS is going to convert that into a paper return. So guys, not to worry about this. Again, I don't want you to memorize this. What we want you to know is, hey, there are situations that the IRS is going to have to look at it because there was some problem with a direct deposit, or the tax return was filed too late and they're going to say, no, we're not going to do a direct deposit. We're just going to mail you a check. That's all. Any questions about that before I go on to the next piece?
No.
Okay. So what if you owe money? If the taxpayer has paid less income tax than they owe, in other words, maybe they paid $1,000 in, but they actually owe $1,200. That means they still owe another $200. They have to pay this additional tax by the due date of the return. Otherwise, they're going to have additional interest charged and penalties charged. Now, taxpayers, here's a note here. Taxpayers should not avoid filing a return because they cannot pay their taxes due. Some people will say, like they'll March 15th rolls around, they know they only have a month left to file their return, and they'll say, well, I'm going to owe, so I don't want to file it yet. They cannot avoid penalties and interest. In fact, they're going to accrue penalties and interest if they do that. You don't want to avoid filing a return because they can't pay the tax due. You either pay the tax due or you make arrangements with the IRS to pay it, but don't avoid it. And that's the advice that you always want to give. If they try avoiding filing their tax return because they can't afford to pay the taxes on it, that is actually going to hurt them and make it harder. The best thing to do is file that tax return, own up to what you owe, and then work with the IRS to set up a payment plan. And we'll talk about that a little later. Okay. So on time, because what will happen is if you do, on top of owing the additional tax, they're going to owe penalties and even more interest for the late payment. Okay. Now, how can the person, if they owe, make payments? Well, one way is they can actually send their payment into the IRS. There's a little payment voucher when you do a return. You get you've got a little payment voucher. It says how much you owe. You send that in with a with a check or money order to the IRS. That's one way to pay it. Another way to pay it is online, and you can go by phone or you can actually go online to do it. Now, when you do that, I just want you to know the IRS is actually, if you're using a credit card to make the payment, the IRS is actually using a third party. They themselves are not running that credit card. It's a third party that's doing the collection for them, and that means there's going to be a fee involved if you use a credit card or a debit card. Okay. And I've already mentioned that if you can't pay the full amount that's owed at the time that it's owed, by the time you do your tax return or April 15th rolls around, you can set up a payment plan with the IRS. So if you're paying by check, I mentioned that there's a voucher. This is what the voucher looks like. It has your name on it, has where it needs to go. It has the amount in there that you need to pay. You just make out a check or money order for it. If you're going to pay, by a check or, money order would go through, but if you're going to pay by check and it bounces, there's going to be some additional fees, just like there would be with any business, where they're going to charge you a fee for a bounced check. Now, there is another option too that we haven't talked about yet, and that is on your tax return, you can actually give the IRS the opportunity just to directly debit it. In other words, take it out of your account for you. Rather than you writing a check or using a credit card, you can give the IRS permission to directly take it right out of your account. You have to give them your routing number and your account number, just like you would if it was a direct deposit, but in this case, they'll directly debit it. And the nice thing is you can tell them which date you want them to do it on, and that's when they'll do it. Okay? Credit card payments, I kind of got ahead of myself. You can pay, there is a benefit to credit card payments. If it's a large bill you owe, you can throw it on a credit card, get points and stuff that your credit card gives you for doing that, just as if you were making a purchase. Plus, it gives you some time to pay it off over time. Here's a disadvantage to doing that. Credit cards usually have fairly high interest rate. Now, the payment, like I said here earlier, the payment can be authorized by calling. You can actually call the IRS, or you can access the website. But keep in mind, it's not really the IRS that runs it. It's a provider, and they're going to charge. It says it may charge a convenience fee. I guarantee you they're charging a convenience fee. So you're always going to pay a little bit for using credit card payment. There's also a thing called electronic federal tax payment system. We're not going to worry about that too much. There's a special system that you could actually even set up for yourself for this. Most people don't do it. But this is highly used for those that have to make payments, businesses and so on, that have to make payments to the Department of Treasury, who handles all the payments for the IRS. But that's all I really want you to know. This payment system exists. Even an individual can set up the system to make payments that way. But it's a lot of work, and truthfully, as a practical matter, this isn't the best way for most individuals. Now, what if you can only pay part of it when it's owed? You owe money, you can only pay part of it, you can't pay it all, or something like that. Well, you can set up an installment agreement. An installment agreement request is done on Form 9465. Now, I do not want you to remember that number. Do not memorize 9465. Just remember installment agreement request. If on a test they were to ask something about it, they're either going to say installment agreement request, or they're going to say Form 9465 installment agreement request. In other words, they're going to have the name right on there. So you're going to know. Don't memorize that form number. And you can file that with a tax return, or you can file it separate from a tax return. There are all sorts of variations on this, and I'm just, rather than trying to go through each of the slides involved, I'm just going to kind of cover them. If you set it up so that you're having it withdrawn automatically, first of all, there's going to be a fee for setting these up, and it can vary from around $40 to a couple $100 to set these up, and it depends on the choices you make. If you have it set up so that the IRS can just automatically withdraw the money or charge the money every month on a particular date with you, that's going to be a lot cheaper than if they have to rely on you to actually write a check to them each month. It's going to be a lot cheaper to set it up. And if you use a direct debit, that's going to be cheaper. And one of the electronic means of doing it, it's going to be cheaper than sending a check. So they have all sorts of different fees, and it all depends on what combination that you use. If you want to keep it the least expensive, set it up using an online system that's automated, and then set it up so that it's directly just taken out of your account each month. That's going to be the least expensive way to do it. There are some of the fees. Don't memorize the fees that they charge here. That is not going to be tested. But like an approved installment agreement is basically $225. But if it's done by electronic funds withdrawal, which we were just talking about, it's going to be $107. If it's set up by way of the online payment agreement, it's going to be $149. If the online payment agreement is set up with an electronic funds fee, you can see it's only $31. So there's all sorts of different fees. The point is make it as automated as possible, and to make it cheapest, make it as automated as possible, and use the automated system and have it automatically withdrawn each month. Normally, if you meet the requirements, and most people do, you're going to be able to get approval pretty much automatically. If it's under a certain amount, I'm not going to get into the amounts because I don't think you need to memorize those to pass this test. If it's under a certain amount, you're going to be able to automatically get it done, the request approved, and as long as you stay on the approval plan, you're going to be good. Approved plan, you're going to be good. Make those payments. There are situations where you might not, because the amount might be too high, you might have to go through a more formal approval request where you send it in and actually have to wait for them to manually process it. If that happens, then you just wait, you work it out with them, and then you make the payments according to the agreement. So none of this is something for your clients to worry about. All amounts owed can be worked out with the IRS to pay it, as long as you don't hide from the IRS or kind of ignore it. When people get into trouble is when they don't file their returns and they ignore what they owe. If they file that return and then contact the IRS to set up an installment agreement, the IRS will work with them. So any questions about that before we go into a knowledge check there, Noemi?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So taxpayers who cannot pay their full balance due should do which of those?
Request an installment agreement from the IRS.
That's exactly right. Request an installment agreement. Applying for bankruptcy, by the way, would not get them not due. Do you know bankruptcy? You cannot bankrupt taxes owed to the IRS. That's actually an exemption from something that's exempt from bankruptcy. Margaret is due a refund of $1,877 this year. She can have the refund split by filing Form 8888, allocation of refund, including savings bond purchases, and have a portion of her refund directly deposited into her pre-established IRA, health savings account, or Coverdell savings education. Is that true or false?
True.
Yeah, it is true. There's a lot of info there. What this is trying to show you is you have so many options for a refund. You've got this 1877. She can have part of it put into a savings bond purchase. And remember, we were saying the U.S. savings bonds and notes and so on. She can use part of it to purchase those and put the rest of it into her individual retirement account or health savings account or Coverdell savings educational account. So those are all options. That's all they're trying to show you. Sid can use Form 8888, allocation of refund including saving bond purchases, to direct deposit his refund into a maximum of how many accounts?
Unlimited?
Nope. It's actually three. That's okay. We actually did not cover that. This is one of those things, if I had thrown it onto a slide, you wouldn't remember, so it's better to cover it here. Look, you can deposit it into your refund, split it up into different accounts, but you're limited to 3 accounts. You can't go over 3.
Okay.
So you could do one to buy, like to buy U.S. bonds, and then part of it into a bank account and the rest of it into your health savings account. But that's 3. That's the 3 right there. Now you're done. You can't split it up any more than 3 ways. Okay?
Okay.
Now let's talk about the signatures. Remember when we did a review, I did my little review of the overview of the Form 1040. I showed you the signature section, which was the bottom part of page 1. The tax return is not complete without a taxpayer signature. If you send in a physical return without a signature, the IRS will send it back to you. The taxpayer must sign and date the return. It must be signed and the date put on it. Now, if you're filing a joint return, both the taxpayer and the spouse must sign and date the return. And that's true even if only one of them had income. It doesn't matter. If it's a joint return, it's a joint return, regardless of who has the income. Now, if they're married filing separate returns, that means each spouse is responsible for his or her own return and signing and dating his or her own return. So if they're filing separate returns, the IRS, the husband files his own return and signs his return. The wife signs her own return and sends her own return in. Now, in addition to their signature, you want to put in the occupation of the taxpayer, and then if they're filing jointly, the spouse. That is not going to have any direct effect on the tax return. It's informational only, but it is required information. So if you have a carpenter, the taxpayer might be a carpenter. The spouse might be a self-employed businesswoman. You'd put self-employed. No big deal. It's just information. Now, you as a paid preparer, you must sign the return as well, and that's right below their signatures. And to do a tax return, you have to have what's called a preparer tax identification number, a PTIN number. You can actually get these for free. You got to apply for it through irs.gov through the professional tax pros section, but it's easy enough, and we can help you with that when the time comes for those that don't already have one. And if you're filing this tax return electronically, then both you and them, both the client and you, need to file a form that's called an 8879 instead of signing the actual Form 1040. That Form 8879 is actually a form that lists a 5-digit number that is put on the tax return for the client. So it might be 97222, and then that's sent in and treated as if that was the client's signature for the Form 1040. But on the 8879, that number's listed, and then below it is the client's physical signature. So in other words, on the 8879, the client is saying, yes, that's the number I'm going to use as my signature for electronic filing. You as the paid tax preparer have to keep a copy of that. Now, if you end up working for us, which we hope you do, our software will automatically assign a 5-digit number, have the client sign, and then it'll automatically keep an electronic copy of that form. But you are required to keep a copy of that form, because if the IRS ever needed to, they could come back and say, let me see that form, and then you print it out or pull it out, and they can see the client's signature with the client's number that was associated with the tax return. That's what the purpose of that is. Does that electronic signature make sense there?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's do a knowledge check here. The bottom of Ezekiel and Valencia's Form 1040, page 1 is not complete. Their filing status is MFJ, and their paid preparer is Charles Franklin, and that's his PTIN number. Fill in where each person should sign the Archer's tax return before it is filed. So obviously you can't physically fill this in because of the way we're doing this. So tell me, where would Ezekiel Archer, the taxpayer, sign and date?
Paid preparer.
No, the taxpayer.
The taxpayer. Okay.
Yeah, the taxpayer.
Sign here, your signature.
Give me just a second. This would be a good, oops, wait a minute. I didn't mean to do that.
That's it.
No, it's okay. I was trying to see, annotate.
Okay, annotate.
No, I
will annotate.
Do you have control of annotate? I don't know if you do or not. Do you have a little annotate somewhere on the top where you can
I'm
mark
doing
on this?
it now.
Oh yeah, I see it. Yes. So you're right. That's where Ezekiel. I didn't know if you could do that or not. I wasn't sure if you had access. In fact, give me just a second. I'm going to play with something for a second. Mouse, select.
Valencia.
No, I was just trying to see. I was just testing something. Yeah, see, I'm able to do that. Put a little arrow. So Valencia, where would Valencia go? Where the V is at. And Charles Franklin is the preparer. Where does he put his info?
Yeah, here.
Yeah, that's right. That's okay. You did good. No, you did good. And where does the P10 go? Hey, I want you to try using that. Under the draw, choose the arrow. Choose that right arrow and then put the arrow where the P10 goes.
Okay.
We're just learning. That's okay. We're just learning to use these tools.
Yeah, P10.
There you go. There you go. Good job. Okay, you use the mouse arrow, but that still works. It's right there. Okay, that's exactly right. Okay, how do I get that off there?
Okay,
you can't see it. No, it's okay. You can't see what I see on my end. It's just my little, I'm just getting my little select tool out of the way. Okay, let's go to the next one. If it'll let me. It won't let me. I gotta stop. I put all these little stamps on here. Okay, there we go. Now it should let me control. There we go. Really? Guess what? I gotta erase all that. Okay, well, we're all learning here. Told you we were all learning this. Brian's probably sitting there laughing at us now. All right. Hold on. I got to go back to this now. They annotate. I got to clear everything. Oops, eraser. Oh, that's not erasing. Oh, clear. Here we go. Clear all drawings. There we go. Got it. See, I'm learning right along with you. Okay. And there you go. That's the completed one where I was having you mark where it goes. Their signature, really their date should have been there. Valencia's signature, the date. Charles Franklin, he'd type his name there and then sign. He'd put the date there. If he's self-employed, if he's working for someone else, he wouldn't, but his PTIN number would be right there. Okay, now, I'm talking about 2018 tax reform changes. I left this in there because it just is somewhat helpful, even though we're ahead of ourselves a little bit. But here are some changes that are coming that came down in 2018. The standard deduction increased a lot from 2017. So we haven't talked about standard deduction, but I'm just going to introduce it here. Standard deduction, if you remember from earlier today where we talked about your AGI minus the deduction. Well, in 2017, a single person could only subtract $6,350. For 2018, they can subtract $12,000. Married filing jointly or qualifying widower could only subtract $12,700 in 2017. 2018, they can subtract or could subtract $24,000, and so on. Tax liability rates decreased. 10% is still there, but the 15% decreased to 12%, 25% decreased to 22%, and so on. You'll see that there are some decreases. So there was just some changes, and that's all I was pointing out. And that's that. So any questions about this part of it?
No.
No.
Can you send me the file?
This file? You know what? This is
What?
all. Ryan, are you still with us? Or he's been working on other stuff. That's why I have to ask him if he's available. I want to make this all available to you, and I absolutely have no problem with it. And actually, he already has a copy of it. Ryan, are you still with us right now? See, he's been dealing with some other stuff. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And I am going to send you a copy of this if it's not too big. I'm not sure what the limits are, okay? So let me try to send it out right now. Let's see here, and that was the filing basics. Oops, made a mistake there. EA presentations. There we go. You know what? I have a smaller version of filing basics that's in PDF. So hopefully this will go. It's actually what I'm sending to you is actually I happen to have a PDF version of this, which makes it a little bit smaller. There you go. Go ahead and save that and let me know when you got that saved.
Yes, it's already saved. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Boy, you're fast. Okay. So, have you already, by now, you should have already read the passkey chapters. In other words, passkey is the official textbook that we are using, right? Have you already read chapters 1 through 3 in that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I know for you personally, Noemi, that's kind of boring, but that gets us caught up through everything we've taught to today. So the next thing is passkey chapters 4 and 5. That'll be the next 2 chapters that we're focusing on. Okay. So my question to you now is, have you had a chance to read chapters 4 and 5?
No.
Okay. That's all right.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Technically, that's what I was supposed to be doing today, but because now we were just getting caught up from what we didn't get done last week. And what I'm tempted to do is actually call it good today and give everyone a chance to catch up today. Because we spent about an hour and a half going over, hour and a half on Friday going over, last session, going over how to use the tools in, how to use the tools here and in Zoom. And so that's where we got off. The next section that I want to go into is actually going to talk basically about employee compensation and interest and dividends, which is what is covered in the next 2 chapters. Now, I know you, Noemi, have been exposed to this, but again, I'm teaching for some people that have not. So, I think what I'm going to do is actually probably call it good for today. Where this is going to put us 1 session behind from our normal plan, but I think that's okay. It gives the people that don't know this stuff as well a chance to kind of catch up. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So there's more information I'm going to share come Wednesday. And what we're going to talk about specifically, just to let you know, I'm going to talk about pre and post-tax. I have a special short presentation on pre-tax and post-tax and what that means, because a lot of people get confused in that when we're talking about employee, compensation. And then we're going to talk about employee compensation. That's going to be our main focus on Wednesday. And then we're going to talk about interest and dividends on Wednesday. And then we're going to jump into a rather difficult section on Friday. It's difficult for those that are new to it because they've never heard it before, but really once you get going with it, I want everyone to hear, it's actually not that bad, and it's basis and depreciation. There's just a lot of information in there, and that's information that is really important to understand when you're dealing with self-employment and things, and that's why we got to talk about them now, because I want to talk about self-employment and so on in a few sessions. But basis and depreciation and capital gains and losses. Big words to stand for something that just is pretty commonsensical, and we'll help you with that. But it's just when you're first being introduced to it, it can feel intimidating, but guess what? It's not as big a deal as it sounds when you first hear it. So this is what I want to share. For Wednesday, for the next class session, you really should read through chapters 4 and 5 in your textbook, the past key chapters. And I keep calling them chapters. I think they call them sessions. What are they? Units. Okay, sorry. Units. And then
4 and 5. Okay.
4 and 5. And then for the following ones, and not for so much the next session, but the following session, you're going to want to work with units or chapters in your textbook 6 through 8. So 6, 7, and 8. Those are the ones that are going to get into the stuff about depreciation and capital gains and losses. Why am I telling you now? Because that one you're probably going to want to get through session or units 4 and 5 right away, and then start reading in 6 through 8, because you're going to want a little extra time to read those. Yes. And so in 2 sessions from now, we will be spending a whole entire 4-hour segment of time just going through those items. But it's not as bad as it sounds. It's just confusing for some people who have never been introduced to it. It's going to be confusing. But I guarantee you, by the time you get done and we do our presentation, you're going to feel a lot better about it. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So do you have any questions before we end today's session?
No.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to let you go. We're going to call it we're going to stop for today just because I need more time to get into the next session. I can't do it in just 1 hour. And I want to try to keep these timed correctly. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll see you later. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye now. Noemi. And Ryan, are you with us right now? Ryan obviously stepped away. I'm going to have to reach out to him on the phone to stop the recording.